Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of VNext. I'm your host, Mike Walker, and today we're in episode 28. Can you believe it? 28. And this episode is going to be about how smart buildings are going to help keep us safe, secure, and much more productive in the wake of all of this uncertainty that's happening around us. And so we're going to be talking with Emmanuel Daniel. Now, he's going to be able to share some of his key insights around this whole smart building space because he's actually working in this space right now. So, Microsoft, one of the largest companies on the planet, is refreshing their campus. He's one of the key innovators around this refresh. So, it's going to be really exciting to hear what are some of the key motivators, the drivers behind this smart campus refresh, but also he's going to give guidance on all the other customers that he talks to in the smart building space. Now, like always, be sure to like and subscribe and all those great things that we like to do in social media just to show your support. But also, if you've got comments and feedback, please provide that as well. And remember, as always, we have the show notes and links and a companion article with all of our episodes on vnextpod.com. That's vnextpod.com. So, with that, let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
So, tell me a little bit about you. I hesitate to give intros for folks because I always do it a disservice. Why don't you start off with telling us a little bit about you and your journey to be the kind of the lead innovator here for Microsoft's applied innovation smart building projects?
Sure, great. So my name is Emmanuel Daniel. I am from Singapore. And the journey for me on smart building started in Singapore. There was a small little program that we ran, and we wanted to test and see what happens to spaces and people. How do we optimize that space? How do we improve efficiency of that space? And how can we transform the age-old facilities management business into something new, into something radical? And with that, we started out the whole thing on optimizing smart buildings, making them sustainable. But then we evolved into saying that there has to be more than just energy savings. So there has to be more than just operational efficiency. What about the humans that interact with those spaces? And I started working on those engagements where we now said that spaces have to adapt to the people that work, play, and live inside them. How do we adapt those spaces? And that's where we came down to the whole concept of experiences in the built environment. That then allowed me to travel all across Asia and MEA, working on multiple projects where people started coming to us and saying, hey, can I design the building to be smart? Can the building be made smart from the ground up? And it was new because generally you build buildings, you then hire an interior designer who then decorates that building, and you have all the furniture, the assets that go into it. But then all of a sudden saying, how do I drive that experience in that space? Now with that, fast forward, we then came down to Microsoft where we said, you know what, we have to transform the way we work. And what better way to transform it than the built environment? And that's where they kicked off the Redmond campus modernization. And with that, I was asked to come help drive that program along with our wonderful partners at RENS, which is Microsoft's Real Estate and Security Group. And that's what brought me to Redmond.
Nice. And so, what is your role specifically on the project?
So my role and the role of the larger team that I have is our job is to help define the digital transformation strategy, solution, and roadmap. So, what does digital transformation actually mean? How does that apply to the built environment? How does technology fit in? How do people consume that technology? And finally, tied to that, how do we iteratively keep innovating? Because innovation just doesn't stop once you open the doors.
Right.
So, putting all that together is what my role is.
Wow. It seems like a pretty big role to have, right? And lots of moving parts. How do you keep it all together? Because there's all these different
Mhm.
aspects, I'm sure, of a smart campus, smart buildings that have to be all coordinated.
Yeah, okay, and that goes without saying. It's an absolutely complex project, but we have great partners from our real estate and security team. And they do a phenomenal job working with them, trying to understand. what physical space is, how do they manage that space, and working with multiple of our engineering groups to understand what are experiences, how should technology adapt to provide great experiences, right? So it's basically a coming together of a great bunch of minds all working together on providing experiences that would wow not the present generation but the future generation of anybody that walks into that campus.
Yeah, and how do you keep up to date with all these new developments that are happening in technology, whether it be IoT or AI or
Hmm.
even, things like regulatory aspects around what we can and
Hmm.
can't do. Are there any tips and tricks that you use to make sure you're up to date? Because, I'm just guessing here, but I would
Hmm.
imagine the decisions that you guys make will be
Hmm.
around for not years, but maybe decades.
No, that's a great point, Mike. And I joke about this all the time. I said the IT projects will probably live for 2, maybe 5 years, right? IT refreshes run in 3-year cycles, or maybe if you are that particular 5-year cycles. But I said a building is not a 3-year or a 5-year thing. It's probably a 20 or a 30-year-old thing. How do you cater for that? And that's where the challenge comes in, because a lot of people use the term future proofing, but then that then does get used a lot out of context, because if you future proof something, you're going to overspend on it, and there's no guarantee you'd actually use it.
Right.
So the approach that we took is, how do we evolve the designs, right? So what that means is getting the space to dynamically adapt to the needs of the person in that space. So you could have guys who've been at Microsoft for a very long time. You could have fresh university recruits that have just joined the company. You could have interns that are coming in. You could have students coming in, and the space would dynamically adapt to their needs and requirements. And that's what we focused on. So the other point that you touched on, which I think is a challenge, the facilities industry and construction as a whole has been very, very stagnant, right? You have outstanding accomplishments with structural engineering, with material sciences, but in terms of how buildings are built, they're fairly straightforward. You have modular buildings, you have energy efficient buildings, but no one actually focused on experience in that building. So when we start talking about how is the ambient environment going to be affected with the wavelength of light that's coming in, and how does that have to be now aligned to code conventions for which you have to get city approval, is something that we don't think about. And also, like, oh, hold on, this requires approval and permitting.
Right.
It's like, okay, what do they actually want to look at, and what are we trying to drive? If you look at the state of Washington, energy guidelines, right? We just can't go fit out the whole thing with bright lights everywhere saying people need to read better. No, it doesn't work that way. The same thing applies to pathways. The same thing applies to streetlights. The same thing applies to roads. Now, what we're trying to do is help people think that I know this is how you used to do it, but if I change a technology, okay, the incremental benefits a human being would get would mandate that we change our guidelines by X and Y. And that's where we work with our general contractors, our work with our MEP consultants, our lighting designers, and the city to come and say, look, we will align to your codes, and this is why we're going to align it or change to it. So those are iterative discussions. There is no set answer for us to go and say, yep, permitting for smart building, it checks all the boxes. Right? And
Right.
that's what we're working with.
Nice. Yeah. And, with regards to getting into the details, let's first kind of tackle the fundamentals. Because I'm
Hmm.
sure as people are listening, everyone has kind of their idea of, what a smart building is or isn't. So, what
Hmm.
would be good would be to start there. And, maybe, because you're in the thick of this, you kind of tell me uh, what in your mind qualifies as a smart building and perhaps
Hmm.
what wouldn't qualify as a smart building.
Right. So and that's a great question, and that's an argument that we've had all the time with folks in the building industry. They've always believed their buildings have been smart, and we don't deny it, because if you look at buildings, they have been collecting data for decades, much before we even started talking about smart buildings. And sometimes people then saying, oh, look, I collect all this data, right, so my building has to be smart, right? Look, it's a smart connected building. And we're like, no, no, not exactly. So we then start telling them a smart building is one where it is connected, it is sustainable, it is efficient, and it is also able to uniquely meet the requirements of the individual user that uses that space. And they said, yeah, but hey, look, my building is energy efficient, my building is sustainable. I'm like, nobody walks into a building imagining the lights won't work. Nobody walks into a building imagining that, oh, you know what, he's going to be freezing inside that building, right? They assume these things will happen, right? So I said a smart building is one that, in addition to being connected, secure, sustainable, it also needs to be able to delight the occupants in that space by allowing them to tune that space to their needs. So, a building that responds to the needs of its users, leveraging data, which is enabled by the underlying technology, is what a smart building is all about.
Right, right, right. And, just like everything in life, I'm sure that
Hmm.
there's probably degrees of smartness to
Yeah.
some of these buildings. Do
Hmm.
you use, because, I've seen multiple different types of maturity models when they look at
Hmm.
different stages of complexity, let's say, of a
Hmm.
smart building. Do you prescribe to that, or do you think that this is you're either smart or you're not?
So, we do prescribe to it. And the reason for that, it really depends on who uses that building. If I've got a bunch of sales folks who come to the building at probably end of the month or every quarter, right, to basically check how they're doing, the building has to be tuned to an absolutely mobile workforce, ad hoc working styles, plenty of collaboration rooms. Okay, if I'm going to build a building that's going to be for engineers like Redmond, right? They come in, their whole focus is, hey, I want to have a space where I can focus, where I can have focused collaboration sessions and just build my components the way I need to do it. So that's where the degree starts to vary depending upon who comes in. Now, even if I take it a step further and we talk about working parents, right? When a working parent comes to a building, what's his priorities? It's like, okay, I need to drop my kids off at school and I need to get to the office on time. Okay, I need to leave the office before the road gets jammed up. Right, so his priority is how can I enter and exit the building seamlessly without having to bother about access, without having to bother about parking. Okay, at the same time, we've got people who love sustainability, right? And we need people who then say that, you know what, it's a beautiful day. Okay, rather than driving, why don't I walk? How is the building going to tell me it's a beautiful day to walk and this is the optimal walking path for me? We also have people who love flora and fauna, especially in Washington State, right? We're all about the trees. How do I encourage people to say that, hey, you know what, if you walk around this trail, you got native species of Washington State that you can explore and learn about? So it's different things to different people, matching their priorities at that point in time. And that's what it's all about. Okay, I don't want to get people to conform to one style of a building. The building adapts to your needs and your requirements.
Very interesting. And, as far as, outside of kind of the general kind of capabilities of a smart
Hmm.
building, what do you think are maybe a few of the benefits? So if you were talking to an executive and,
Hmm.
they said, hey, Manuel, why should I consider a smart building, at least in how we define it
Hmm.
versus what I've been using for the past decade?
Hmm.
Um, you know, and you could imagine things like, what you were saying around delighting the occupants,
Hmm.
around perhaps it's facilitating a healthy work style,
Hmm.
a healthy workplace. Maybe it's social distancing. Maybe it's many different things. But in your mind, what do you see as some of the primary benefits
Hmm.
of a smart building?
So for any exec, the clear benefit has to be, okay, am I going to get cost savings from this building? Because there is a cost to making a building smart. It's not, I mean, it's not free. So the first thing I'll tell them is yes, you would start making your building more efficient, more optimized. Hence, you're going to have operational cost savings. But that's not the only thing. You then have to start looking at what are the people benefits you're going to get. You're going to drive better collaboration, better productivity. And the question is, oh, how would you do that? Don't you already have all the possible software you could probably buy? I said, yes, you do. But nothing replaces human collaboration. Nothing replaces accidental collisions, as we call them.
Right.
Right? I may be thinking about something, right? I may have been struggling with it. I just don't know who I should go and reach out to. But then all of a sudden, based on walking patterns, based on seating patterns, yeah, I accidentally pass by the place of someone who's right there at that point in time and says, hey, you know what? I have this idea. Can I discuss that with you? Nothing boosts innovation and productivity than ad hoc collaboration does.
So what you're saying, Emmanuel, is instead
Hmm.
of me flipping left or right, the building's flipping left and right, and see who needs to be
Hmm.
matchmaking, having those conversations.
Right. In an atmosphere that is conducive to you. We always get this all the time. Uh, we've got people who love to work in ice cold environments. It's just their thing.
Hmm.
But you also have people who love to go out the first time they see the sun and they say, you know what, the sun is my thing. How do we bring these people together in a space where they will generally sit at two opposite corners of the building, okay, into common ground to say, hey, you two need to collaborate and you need to collaborate in a way that's comfortable for you? That's where the beauty of a smart building comes in creating that conducive environment for everybody on the team. Now, at the same time, we also have the other challenge, right? And Mike, in my previous role, I used to travel extensively. I mean, I've probably been on a plane so many times. I mean, it's on par with the aircrew. I've seen the same aircrew come back in the plane when I come back. And the question there is, how do you ensure the atmosphere in the buildings is clean and safe?
Right.
How do you ensure the space in that building is not draining you out? It's not putting you to sleep. I mean, both of us, Mike, have been in rooms where we had long meetings, and then automatically everybody starts to yawn and starts to doze off.
Hmm.
Can I change that by pumping in fresh air? Can I change that to create a better atmosphere in terms of lights? And submariners do this all the time. The wavelength of light in the office directly corresponds to how you're going to respond. So, can I artificially create that stimulation in office buildings, right? Boosting immunities, boosting the way people interact. And that's what it's all about, right? Creating these atmospheres where you're going to go into a building and not only be a productive version of yourself, but also a healthier version of yourself. And that's why we say okay, automating everything is not the answer. Automating what is needed to drive the balance between physical well-being and productivity is what we are after.
Yeah, and I think that's a really really cool and interesting point because what you're saying here, kind of reading between the lines, and really utilizing my active listening skills here. One, you're talking about how to foster an environment of
Hmm.
collaboration that isn't forced or
Hmm.
doesn't seem forced. It doesn't seem deliberate, but it's these accidental collisions that you talked about. That the system is built in a way that it's saying, look, these like-minded individuals, or maybe even not like-minded individuals, but
Hmm.
we need to create some creative tension here to do X, Y, or Z.
Yep.
Um, that's really fascinating. You can, and whether it be with building design itself, where you've seen
Hmm.
classic examples of let's say Steve Jobs with Pixar and how he created
Hmm.
very deliberately the architecture of the building around that collaboration. What it sounds
Hmm.
like a differentiator from that Pixar building to what you're talking about is that the environment itself is dynamic.
Hmm.
And this dynamic environment not only utilizes the physical space that's been architected,
Hmm.
but it's also utilizing kind of the information component of the context of the people that are within that building and
Hmm.
bringing the best of the physical and the best of the digital world together.
Yep.
Am I getting that right?
You are, and the way you look at it, Mike, is, in hospitals, you got cows, computers on wheels. Why do you have computers on wheels? Because the technology goes to the patient, right? The patient can't get up of his bed and he comes to the technology. So technology is moving towards the patient to meet their needs. In space, why do I have to move from space to space? Why can't the space meet my demands and needs that I have at that point in time? Right? It's a similar concept. We're trying to make that space dynamic. So the room that you're in, the four walls you're in, can adapt to suit your needs at that point in time. Hey, you want to have a one-on-one focus discussion? Boom. Hey, you want to have brainstorming, rapid innovation, collaborative style discussions? Boom. Hey, you want to figure out how you're going to drive active use a room to boost your health and wellness, right? I would like to take a micro break in this room. Boom, the boom key would adapt to itself. That's what you're talking about, bringing the technology to the space where the space adapts to your needs.
Nice. Yeah. And, obviously to pull all this stuff off, you and I as innovators, we know that the
Hmm.
technology is the toolbox. Really
Hmm.
what we talk about with innovation is, trying to understand what is the root issue, the root problem that we're trying to solve to make
Hmm.
all of our lives better, whether that be in a
Hmm.
work environment where we're more productive, in a home environment where we're more relaxed and healthy, etc. But a common thread is there is a technology component to all of
Hmm.
this. And so for smart buildings, what do you think is kind of the foundational building blocks from a technology perspective for a
Hmm.
smart building?
So and that's a great point because ultimately we talk about all this, but you need enablers to make that happen.
Right.
So for smart building, the predominant thing that we look at while bringing up that building is one, the core infrastructure. Core infrastructure talks about all the assets and the subsystems that go into the building. Are they Can they be connected? Okay, are they able to expose and share the data that they're capturing? Two, it comes back to the fundamentals. Do I have enough power in that building to power up all the devices that I need, right, to enable the experiences? Three, it comes back to space.
Yeah.
Space because I got to hang these devices. Okay, I got to lay the cables. I got to run the power. Do I have space in that building to sufficiently support the infrastructure that I would need to make all of this happen? So I'd always tell them it's just infrastructure, power, and space is what we are trying to look for and optimally use. And once again, this is not space where we talk about refreshing it every 3 years. I am designing space for the life of the building, which could probably be a decade or more than a decade before the next refresh or the renovation happens, right? If I don't have core infrastructure, if I don't have power, and if I don't have space, I can't enable any of these experiences. That's why building designing the building to be smart is a key requirement that we would like to have.
Right, right, right. Yeah. And so we've talked about, what these things are. We talked about
Hmm.
what are the benefits and why I should invest in these smart
Hmm.
buildings. We talked about some of the key enabling technologies. What about the aspect of common capabilities, common
Hmm.
functions of a smart building? Um, Maybe, contextualize it for us as far as what would be some of the kind of the discrete activities of a smart building. So, as an
Hmm.
example, the easiest one for people to kind of grok is the security aspect of, controlled
Hmm.
entryways and, being able to make that more intelligent. But also
Hmm.
when you're inside the building, what other types of common capabilities do you see as
Hmm.
identified directly with a smart building type of project?
See, so as very simple for us, right? And okay, and you touched on a beautiful point. You said security, but on the whole, it's access.
Yeah.
How seamlessly can I get access to that building? Access comes in the form of security in terms of authorizing yourself or someone you want to get into. Access also comes with parking your car, walking out of the car. How soon can I find the parking spot that's closest to the door that I want to get into? I'm in a rush. If you look at our building, we're building a parking structure that's thousands of cars. Okay, I'm in a rush. I forgot where I parked my car. How do I find it when I go back? I can't walk around clicking it wherever I go.
Oh boy, that never happens on campus, does it?
No, that's
The sea of parking lots.
there's a sea of parking lots, right? So getting to the building, parking your car, parking your bike, walking to the building, getting out of the building to your next destination. Once you're inside the building, how do you find the room that you want to get into? And you've been on campus, you've got multiple buildings where we hop from building to building for a meeting, right? And after working here for so long, you still don't know what most of the buildings and the rooms are. How do I drive that engagement? Second, once I find the room, how do I find the person who's supposed to get to the room? And does he know how to get to the room?
Hmm.
Now, in addition to that, so these are all the day to day activities that we're trying to optimize as and when the person starts coming in. So for the normal user, you shouldn't feel anything. You're like, man, this is fantastic. Look, the parking spot is right there, the door is right there, the room is right there, right? It should just pass you by without even thinking twice to say that this was planned for you. The next part of it, right? Okay, I get to the room. Now, you have a meeting, there's a certain way you like to run your meetings. You'd like to have the lights at a certain level, you'd like to have the ambience at a certain level, noise at a certain level. This what matters to you the most. How is that going to be preset for you before you even get to that room? And when you leave that room resets like none of it ever happened. So all these softer, tangible aspects are what we're trying to drive at. Now, you may think, hold on, he's talking about all this, but isn't this going to be a huge burden on the infrastructure? He's fluctuating lights, he's fluctuating the environment, right? And he's turning on directional signs wherever he goes, everything is being navigated in. And that then comes back to the core requirement of the building being sustainable, optimizing the amount of energy it consumes to be able to provide you these services.
Yeah, man, you hit on a
Balancing all
great
of it
point
is what is it. Mhm.
because, I generate a lot of heat. I'm blowing a lot of hot air out of my mouth. I'm waving my
Hmm.
hands around. There's a lot going on, and so my energy consumption requirements are going to be quite high. But no, so also for folks that aren't keyed into the terminology,
Hmm.
when you say a sustainable way, that's another way of saying in a more green oriented way, a more climate change conscious oriented way is what you're referring
Hmm.
to.
Yes, absolutely. And the Microsoft sustainability commitments are public. We publish them. But if you look at the other aspects of it, how do I use energy from the most greenest source for powering my building? Because you got power quality, right? And those are the finer aspects of smart buildings which people don't understand. Choosing what grid I would consume energy from, the grid that is the cheapest, that is the greenest at that point in time, is the other aspect where we can always ensure our residents that, hey, you know what? All the hot air you blow, don't worry about it. We're making sure that you are kept cool and comfortable in the most sustainable way possible without denting the environment. That's what gets said and done, which no one even realizes.
Right. Nice. And the other gripe that I have, and most people probably won't know this, for
Hmm.
not being on campus, but finding a parking space, man, is no small feat.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully, we're doing more than just light indicators on parking spots. Anything you can
Hmm.
share there that will help the common Microsoftie try to find a parking space?
Oh yeah, sure. And before I actually answer that, Mike, I want to share a small little story that I learned when I was in my traveling role. And I go down to the Middle East, and they have this massive university, and there's no. Okay, if you go to Singapore, you would understand what shortage of space means, because
Right, right.
Singapore is a small island, very very dense. You come down. When I came down to Redmond, and when I used to travel to the Middle, I was like, wow, these places are huge. Right? Why do you guys have to worry about parking? Look at all the space that's in front of you, right? And when I was talking to this person, the person came and said, "Hey, our biggest challenge is parking." I was like, "I don't get it. Just look at the space. What's the problem with parking?" He says, "No, no, this is the problem. When we have exams, right, and students try to circle around finding the closest parking spot to the examination hall." I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Sometimes because there's so much of space, they park far away, and by the time they walk in, they get late. So how do I ensure that we can always assure them, don't waste time circling around. This is the best available parking spot for you so you can get to the examination hall on time." I was like, you know what? I never thought of it that way. I just saw all the space and I said, why do you have to worry about parking? And it's the same thing that we try to do for Redmond. We have all these parking lots, but human psychology, I want to find the best parking lot closest to the door. Right? Even though I'm early for a meeting, I still want that. And people spend, you'd have noticed, Mike, people will go around in circles finding that pot of gold in that parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
So what we try to do is we try to say, how do I drive efficiency by changing human behavior? Because people will always want the best lot, and they have to see it to believe it. Right? So our goal was, in addition, not just having red and green Christmas tree lights everywhere, right? That's something we don't want to do, yeah, because it's just not efficient. So we said, can we have a system where we will guide the driver to the best parking lot at that point in time that would allow him to reach his destination after parking the car efficiently and on time, and not have to worry about where he left his car, because after the meeting is done, he can automatically find his way back to the car in the most efficient way? What does that mean? Then we said, oh, yes, but this has to do with behavioral change. What happens if he comes from, okay, entrance A, entrance C, entrance D? He said, okay, it doesn't matter. No matter where he comes from, the system would always guide him to the best lot. And they said, okay, how do we deal with safety issues? Because if you go inside parking lots, you have people that do tend to think that this is their this is need for speed kind of situation, right? A race down that alleyway. So looking at driver safety, looking at pedestrian safety, and trying to say that keep your eyes on the wheel and look at the signage in front of you that is going to dynamically tell you for your particular car that this is where you need to go, because this is the best lot for you to get to the building that you want, to the room that you need to. Right. So that level of specificity, as we would call it, because generally today you go into a parking lot, the arrows flash all sides. 100
Yep.
parking lots to your left, 100 parking lots to your right. If you go ahead, so human psychology is, you know what? Okay, I'll go left because that's closer to the door, and I'll find that one hidden parking lot somewhere in the corner, only to find out someone is double parked,
And
right? And you waited 20 minutes.
inevitably what happens is either the
Hmm.
scenario of the sign says floor 2 has one parking spot, and you're in a sea of cars, you're like, you know what, I'm going to get there first. Or maybe you're like,
Uh huh.
okay, I see that the system says there's no available spaces, but I don't trust it. I'm going to
Yes.
go and double check and just make sure, and maybe I'll just circle around because maybe I'll get
Hmm.
lucky that I'll time it just right and someone will leave.
Hmm.
um so, obviously we're fighting probably, evolution, and
Hmm.
the what I lovingly refer to as the Costanza effect. If
Hmm.
those familiar with Seinfeld, where George is always trying to make good time, um at the fastest speed possible to get
Hmm.
somewhere. But um the technologies that are to enable that, and to your point
Hmm.
earlier around frictionless, to your point around an enjoyable experience,
Hmm.
what technologies do you think, not necessarily with the Microsoft campus refresh, but with
Hmm.
in general with smart buildings, do you think are the key technologies to enable these types of capabilities?
So at a base level, I think when we start talking about parking, we're trying to move away from conventional parking systems, right, where they use traffic lights, right? Every stall has a red green light tied to it, and we're trying to go down to the direction of camera-based parking technology, where a single camera can monitor multiple bays or stalls, right? Either six, eight, depending upon what version you get. This then allows us to dynamically provision the lots to say that, hey, I would like to have an accessible parking lot, or I've got a special event, right? So rather than having the conventional way, I use digital signage integrated with camera based parking that allows me to dynamically manage my lots. Second, we're also talking about navigation inside the lot. So when you talk about navigation, it's always about what type of accuracy do you want to drive? Do you have a cell system within your garage? Because okay, I'm okay, underground, thousands of cars. Do I have connectivity? Should I be using a cell phone connectivity with 4G, 5G, or should I be leveraging the Wi-Fi network? Is there an acceptable loss when I transition from a GSM network onto a Wi-Fi network when I come into the garage? Is that loss acceptable? We then start talking about density, right? How accurate do you want to be? Do you want to go within the slot level? Do you want to go within a few feet of the car? And what type of navigation do you want to use? Are you talking about navigation using beacons? If so, do I have the right amount of beacon density being deployed? Right, and that's where the elements of choice starts to come in depending on what you want to do. We also started toying about with ALPR, license plate recognition cameras. And it's not new technology, it's been there, but integrating it to create a dynamic path just for you to find you that perfect lot for what you want to do is something that we're trying to do. So people would start believing the system. And I think you actually hit the nail on the head, Mike. Very beautifully said. You said people don't trust the system. Conventionally, all parking lots will always have a buffer. So they will always put a lesser number of available lots than the actual lots there because, when you go there, you actually find something you don't. So they set your expectations. Don't go there looking for hundreds of lots, right? Even though they may be there, I'm just going to show a lesser number of lots on the screen.
Yeah.
And that's why people still go and look for them, right? That's how it is. But our idea was let's be accurate and predictable. If my system is going to say there is one lot in that zone, that is a lot that's going to be available to you. And this comes up to the next point that you said is I have 10 cars coming in and all 10 will be after that lot because they all believe they can reach it much faster than the others, right? So you have speeding, you have rash driving. So we said, no, customize it. So depending upon the order and priority of the car, how do I get that user's attention to navigate them to that lot so I have safer driving, disciplined driving in that lot, getting them to where they have to go. So those finer elements of using CellDAS, of using Wi-Fi, of using Bluetooth beacons, all this powered with a network backbone in an open structure, right? Because parking lots aren't secure. I don't swipe my badge to get into a parking lot. I just drive into the parking lot. And making this available to friends, to visitors, to family that come onto the Microsoft campus is the challenge we're going through.
Yeah. Nice. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of kind of technologies that you're mentioning behind the scenes,
Hmm.
and kind of what I visualize, at least in my head as you're talking, is, almost like I would love to get like some augmented reality for my
Yep.
my windshield, where I've
Yes.
got as an employee and a device that projects onto my windshield, and it just tells me,
Hmm.
hey. you've been automatically assigned. We know you've got a meeting in this building, so we've already reserved your
Hmm.
parking spot. So you don't have to find anything. And if
Yep.
you need help finding it because parking lots can be confusing on different levels and different entryways, we'll
Hmm.
give you the turn by turn directions right there on your windshield so you can find the right
Yep.
place to go.
Hmm. And that's beautifully said, Mike. Because the reason for that.
Uh oh. Looks like we've hit our first podcast network interruption. Welcome to the pandemic, everybody. All right, let's see if we can. Pandemic. It must be that time of day where all the gamers are getting online, interrupting our bandwidth here, which is a great segue to talk
Hmm.
about um, the consumerization of these technologies. And so,
Hmm.
at least what I find is that a lot of the commercial business oriented innovations,
Hmm.
their roots can be found in consumer technology.
Yep.
And so, where do you see the influences from consumer technology? Like, let's say, the Google standards, Samsung standards, Apple standards. How is that positively or in a negative way have impacted smart buildings? Because I know that,
Hmm.
you know, I geek out a lot. I'm a remote worker. My
Hmm.
entire house is all lit up with a whole bunch of smart devices, and none of them will talk to another vendor's technology.
Hmm.
So there's an integration nightmare. They don't all work as advertised as much as I would hope and pray that they do.
Hmm.
And in general, it's been a promise that hasn't been quite
Hmm.
realized yet. And so, from your perspective, when you look at these more consumer technologies, how has
Hmm.
that impacted smart buildings? And obviously, we're proposing a lot of really cool things around changing the
Hmm.
experience. But for companies that have been doing this for a while in the consumer space, they haven't quite cracked that nut yet. What are your
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
No, it's a great point, and I think this is a big struggle for smart buildings as a whole because the effects of consumerization. If you look at what we're doing with smart buildings, you've got multiple suppliers for multiple products. A building is just not one homogeneous system. I got to buy chillers from someone. I got to buy the BMS from someone. I got to buy a parking system from someone, and everybody claims everything is open, interoperable. I got to buy
Right.
lights from somebody else. And the challenge that we face with consumerization is we are prone to buying multiple things in the hope and aspiration that all of them will work seamlessly. And with consumers, if it doesn't work, I can toss it out. I can bring something else and test it, and I can work with it. We don't have that flexibility in a building because those systems cost hundreds and thousands of dollars, right? And the cost to put them in is even more. So our whole goal was, how do we keep the landscape heterogeneous, but at the same time ensure that all of the systems will seamlessly talk and communicate with each other. So we took the direction of building something known as a digital integration platform. We said this is the platform that's going to unite data flow across all these systems. The second part with consumerization is the ability to choose what I want to use, how to consume it. Right? You beautifully said it. Right? Samsung, Apple, Android versus the other stuff out there. How do I cater the experience so with respect to Android and iOS, I get the same experience. I get it to be consistent. I don't want to force someone to change devices. Now, if they want to change devices, that's fine too. But accessibility should be across the board for all of this. So the giving users the power of choice to consume the service how they want to consume it in a way that is consistent across multiple devices and screen sizes was something that we take very seriously. And the biggest fear for us is we build all this stuff and nobody uses it because like
Right.
all the stuff that we have at home, if it doesn't work, I just stop using it.
Now, that's a great point, and I think, because what I think of when I hear,
Hmm.
like an announcement that happened late last year, where Google, Amazon, Apple, Zigbee, and others had essentially all teamed up to
Hmm.
essentially create a shared standard, at least
Hmm.
from a consumer perspective, around these smart home. technologies.
Hmm.
And so, and then you heard it even here earlier today. So now people know when we recorded this, with Apple announcing essentially them open sourcing HomeKit, their
Hmm.
platform, and their
Hmm.
further commitment for cross integration, etc. And so, if you've got, let's say, in the Apple ecosystem, I've got my home, which now is my home office because I'm
Hmm.
spending a portion of my time at home, whether it's permanently due to the pandemic or a large portion of my time.
Hmm.
I've got the same experience that's translated in my pocket wherever I go, my
Hmm.
wearables, but also my car, and integrated there. Where do you see, since this is an effect of this kind of
Hmm.
permeation of these smart home technologies crossing over into our other aspects of our lives, going around the edge,
Hmm.
of the smart building world? Where do you see the intersections? Do you think that there will be more and more leveraging of these smart home technologies, or will it be an integration point? What are your thoughts around that?
So this is something that we did discuss, and this was a key for us because this is where we start talking about benefit to the employee,
Right.
whether they choose to stay at Microsoft or they choose to try something else, right? And that's where we started talking about data portability, your personal data, your preferences. Can I take that with me to my home office, right? So all the devices and the environments that I have at home will, automatically sync up to the way I was when I was working. Can I take this with me to another building, right? Where that building's room, spaces, environments would then start adapting to what I want because I'm so used to working, right? So we said we create environments and preferences that you as the individual can take and port wherever you want to go. Okay, I'm on a run. I would like to take my call okay, on the run, and I would like to have the environment in terms of my noise canceling sessions, okay, the background sound minimization tuned to what I'm doing at that point in time. I am transitioning from home to, like you said, the for many of us, our home office is the office, right?
Yeah.
That's where we live, breathe, and spend most of our time. But if you do go into the common office, how do you mimic that environment so you don't view it as a burden? So, portability of data and consuming that data across the choice of consumer devices that you would own, okay, versus the choice of automation systems that you have within your house, right? We all have heaters, we all have chillers, right? And the same thing happens in the office. Making that data portable, consumable across the consumer devices is something that we're seriously thinking about because this then means, okay, I'm not only looking at you as an employee of my company, I'm looking at you as a person who I am creating a foundation to have experiences wherever you go. Now, it sounds really easy and cool, but because you have heterogeneous landscapes, with each one defending their own turf, with all fairness, right? Right, we have to be competitive. How do I bring them together to talk about the minimum amount of data that I need to share and collaborate with? The challenge that we've noticed is the moment someone says open standards, they believe everything has to be opened up. And we says, no, right? You're talking about 10,000, 15,000 data points in a building. Do you want all those data points or you don't? You probably need a subset of that.
Right.
What is that minimum data model that needs to exist for experiences in a building is what we are trying to define.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head here when you talked about going back and forth between the home office and the primary office, as you described it. And I think what this pandemic has exposed for a lot of people is uh, that the virtual remote worker is
Hmm.
one in which that pattern of behavior of work is going to
Hmm.
be um, uh, a more of a focus for folks. Going to be more of a request. So when you hear about Twitter saying, their CEO saying, "Look, you guys can work from home forever."
Hmm.
Facebook, same thing. Amazon, similar thing. All these major companies are saying, "Look, we needed to kind of experience this whole remote work thing to be able to say,
Hmm.
yes, this is a viable option for my employees." And so when we're in this kind of blended zone, and I talked about this on another podcast when I talked about the future of work. I talked
Hmm.
about the aspect that we'll use our spaces in a very fit for purpose way. And
Yep.
so, I would envision, at least this is how I work,
Hmm.
when I need to be heads down and I need to get some analysis done, or I just need concentration time, Um, Being at my home office is great because many of the distractions are not there.
Hmm.
Now, if I want to collaborate and, I want to go to the primary office and I want to go there and be able to interact with people in meaningful ways, whether it be accidental, that's been kind of orchestrated in the cloud,
Hmm.
or very, very deliberate. But I find that, at least for me, being a remote worker for the past decade, that uh, I get so much more productivity out of that. And so, with that scenario or potential scenario
Hmm.
emerging, how do these two worlds kind of come together and give me one common user experience when maybe, at my house, I'm fully HomeKit enabled and there's security and privacy features for my family because there's camera systems and there's,
Hmm.
all these sort of personal preferences on door locks and this and that. And how will that kind of Venn diagram over my primary office preferences, and then the
Hmm.
data be portable back and forth to have kind of this, here is Mike Walker's minimum viable work product, or set of data that needs to be portable to go from the office to my vehicle
Hmm.
to a recreational area to my home office, or maybe even
Hmm.
on the couch as I'm checking emails with my wife sitting next to me. uh, how do you see that all kind of coming together in a material way?
Hmm. So that's a great question, and we actually encountered this when we were designing our data model, which we're still doing. So what we said is ultimately you've heard the whole thing where we start talking about personas,
Hmm.
right? So we take the remote worker as a persona, we take the developer as a persona, we take the FM manager as a persona. So what we then said is, "Hey, hold on, but the right, and I love the way you brought in your family sitting on the couch and doing work, right? That is the reality. That's what people do. No one shuts off at 5 p.m. and just don't check email after that. So we said it is no longer about work styles and work patterns, but it's about behaviors.
Right.
What are the behaviors different employees are exhibiting? And what are the behaviors we would like to cater for when we design the experiences? So, Mike Walker's behavior of being an absolute road warrior, having ease of connectivity, ease of access to data, ease of access to environments, and porting that to his couch, to his office, to his study, to his den, wherever he is. What behavior is he trying to go with him, and how can we support that behavior? Is that data model that we're trying to define, right? And that's why we say that this is your priorities as a road warrior. If I take a priority as a working parent, my behavior is going to be all about saving time to pick up my kids, get them home, get them ready, get them to do something, right? So my behaviors have been centered around how can I be more efficient with time management. Yeah, I've got somebody else who's an intern, right? His behavior is all about exploring. So this is where the data models and the systems that they touch with and they consume with start making sense to us. Saying, okay, Mike, it's all about seamless access, and because you're such a strong road warrior, you probably don't drive all that much. So parking is not your biggest problem. Right? Your problem is going to be getting access into that building in the quickest possible way using any mode of transportation you choose at that point in time. Right? Me, hey, you know what? You drive all the time because you got to drop your kids off at school. So choosing the route, getting a parking lot, and getting into that building is your biggest priority. You love to work outside all the time. So using weather data to be able to predict the choice of office or workspace you want to get to is your biggest behavior. So these variations are what allows us to build that data model. Now, that being said, we are treading on a fine line with privacy,
Right.
right? To say, well, hold on, do you do you really want to know all this about me, and should I be telling you this stuff? And the answer is no, you don't have to. But if you want to drive that level of productivity where you own your data, right? I'm not going to take your data and say it belongs to me. You own your data, you share what you need or what you want, and we use that to optimize the space to your requirements is where the choice starts to coming in. And once again, the anything tricky to do with capturing human data is being able to predict who that individual is Okay, and doing so accurately is going to be a violation, right? And that's what we try to say. We're going to try to anonymize it as much as we can, right? So that you can be trustworthy of that system, that this is not going to be exploited.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge issue. Whether it be my personal preferences, whether it be even my civil liberties
Hmm.
around being tracked and my data being used and
Hmm.
uh, with an intention of positive behavior, but as we know that sometimes there's unintended
Yep.
consequences of maybe there is a backdoor and a hacker has gotten
Hmm.
access and bad things happen, right? And
Right.
so, I've been a fan of the model that on your mobile device, all your data is right there, and as you
Hmm.
go into an environment, that environment you can choose to share that information in the context of you can only process my data. You cannot
Hmm.
store my data. My data
Yep.
is always stored on my device. You can cache it for the time that I'm there for my visit, for, a
Hmm.
day or two or whatever it may be. But ultimately, that data gets purged and it's always with me. The data at rest is always with
Yep.
me.
Hmm.
I've always been a fan of that type of model
Hmm.
because that gets us out of so many issues.
Right.
S-
And that's beautifully said. That's what we say. Okay, a smart building is where the battle is fought on the edge.
Right.
Right. So having those edge devices, edge computing capability, okay, either containerizing it, okay, anonymizing it, and purging it as and when you enter and leave that building is what it's all about. Because the moment, like you said, the comfort feeling even I have is know me and forget me.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we drive for.
Well, and the amazing part that sometimes we forget about is whatever type of device you have in your pocket, whether if it's Android, an Apple, a Huawei, or whatever type of device. I mean, these mobile devices have similar horsepower as our laptops, and in
Yep.
some ways, I would even assert even more power because they've got things like you know bionic chipsets. They've got AR
Hmm.
capabilities, on chip, ready to go, that
Hmm.
provide this capability right there. And so,
Yeah.
how do we tap into that to reduce the complexity and the enterprise requirements on the smart buildings, as an example?
Hmm. No, that's beautifully said, Mike. And I think the one of the key things we're actively designing for is how do we lower the burden of cognitive load on the human being?
Yeah.
Because you have your phone with you all the time, super powerful devices, right? Is that good for you? Is that load good on your mind, right? Having that connectivity all the time. Because the best way to focus is to break that connectivity, right?
Right.
Hence, eliminating that cognitive load. So, creating a building that also allows you to minimize the cognitive load you're having without having to worry about it, okay, is the other design challenge that we've also been put through.
So we've been circling, right, around this massive project you're working on. I mean, we're talking about
Hmm.
a multi-year.
Hmm.
Uh, what are we up to? 18 buildings that we're going to
17, 17.
17 buildings,
Yep.
close to 7 million square feet of workspace. I mean, this is a massive, massive project.
Hmm.
Um, so as far as this Microsoft campus refresh, um, how ambitious do you think this will be? I mean, are we going to be creating biospheres within our campus and spaceships and
Hmm.
other trendy things, or are there going to be more practical types of capabilities that this campus will provide?
Hmm. So the from a size perspective, Mike, you're talking about 72 acres, 17 buildings, and around 2.5 million of workspace inside it. Uh, People wise, you're talking around 12,000 people, probably a little bit here and there, when the final sizes come out. Our goal is all about practicality. Uh, Trendy is fine, right? And I think it needs to be trendy, but at the same time, the 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 biggest challenge that I'm dealing with is I'm designing for everyone. I'm designing for people who've been in Microsoft for 25, 30 years. Yeah, I'm designing for the new joinee. I'm designing for the friend, the family, the student who would potentially walk into the campus and say, Dad, Mom, this is the company that I want to work in. right? This is the place I want to get to. That's that's the place that we're trying to go into. Now, with that angle, how, how do I meet those requirements? How do I cater for that, right? And that's what I'm trying to do. Uh, that can only be done if I create something that is practical. And practicality for us is about using services that that demographic at that point in time will start to consume.
Right.
And that
Now,
is a challenge.
now the big question though is, are you going to create a Microsoft building number 7?
But you got to wait and find out. Yes,
So,
the
so
mhm,
this is the infamous building number 7 that does not exist at Microsoft, in which is a bit of a hazing
right.
ritual for new hires to see if they can find
Mhm.
the ever elusive building number 7.
Right. The okay, is that going to make a comeback? Just have to wait and see.
Okay, the anticipation is building. Um, so, as far as some of the features specific to the Microsoft campus, what do you think is going to
Hmm.
be some of the uh, when we talk about making things frictionless, making it easier,
Hmm.
making it more productive, what do you think will be some of the signature things that people think about when we're done with the campus?
So one key thing is going to be the open spaces, open and green spaces that we have. And the goal for us is okay, it's about driving work from anywhere. I don't have to be the most productive version working inside four walls. I can be that same level of productivity having a meeting in an open space, in a garden, under a treehouse, or in a treehouse. Ensuring that we are able to give you same level of uncompromises experiences no matter where you are on the campus is going to be the signature thing. For me, the goal is when someone walks in and walks out without a single hitch and have the flexibility to work from anywhere at any point in time, right, without having the need to feel okay, a single pain point, okay, and not even having to realize that, oh my goodness, the building and the campus did this for me is what I would call success. The moment I become visible is where I fail because you now have to do something that is aiding you to achieve your results, right? So for us, it's the eternal quest to stay invisible and putting you as a sole owner of what you would like to achieve. I mean, it's hard to do because there are so many touch points we have to think of.
Right.
And that's why for us, the campus journey is not open the building and it's done. It's an iterative multi-year journey. And that's what we are aspiring to.
And so, when you say open spaces, obviously in the productivity world, the office space world, there's been
Mhm.
lots of kind of negative press on
Mhm.
kind of this bullpen type of structure.
Right.
Do you mean something a little bit different than kind of what we think of traditionally as open space, or is it just the same thing but modified a bit to be more user friendly?
So the okay, same thing. Okay, the way you look at it is probably so. When I say open spaces, within Microsoft, we've gone down to the concept of neighborhoods.
Yep.
We've gone down to the because we believe that okay, in neighborhoods teams can work together. It's more collaborative. It's catered for that person. You go to our sales offices, right? They are open spaces, right? They are catered for a mobile workforce. So when I say open spaces, I'm talking about any space. If you decide to go out and sit in the middle of one of our fields and you decide to open up your laptop and we have a conference call, a video conference call with the bandwidth requirements, I have ensured that I have provided you the connectivity that you need to be able to use that service. If you decide to have your lunch in the middle of a soccer field, because you know theoretically you can if there's no match going on, yeah, and you want to have someone deliver food to you at that spot, that person should be able to find Mike Walker because Mike Walker loves to eat in the middle of a soccer pitch. That's what it's all about. So that level of customization and that level of, okay, of being able to work anywhere is what we're after. And we want to do that for that campus.
So have the days of the endless hallways of offices, is that dead now?
It's dying, let's put it that way.
So so you'd mentioned tree houses.
Hmm.
Are there going to be more tree houses, because my kids love those things.
Hmm.
I think they're cool as well, but are there going to be more tree houses? Are there going to be more things like tree houses?
Hmm.
that is there for kind of more inspirational or free thinking type of environments?
So, free thinking, inspirational, absolutely yes. The reason for that is we're trying to get down to a lot of pedestrian friendly areas, right, where you walk, you move around, you start. And the beautiful thing is the the 17 buildings across 72 acres. We have designed them into 5 villages. But the reason for the villages is so that each village is unique, has its own look and feel, has its own style to it. So when you walk from one village to another village, right, you sense the difference. And that can be either an inspiration to you, motivation to you. You can say, hey, guess what? I'm going to work in Sammamish today. I'm going to work in Chelan today, right? So that inspirational quality starts to come in. We're also trying to make it more walkable, more pedestrian friendly. So you should walk around the campus. You should explore the campus. You should be able to sit down and have a coffee where you choose to, and be able to open up, connect, and work seamlessly. So that's where the inspiration comes in. And the whole goal for us is to be able to engage with yourself, engage with the community, engage with anyone that you see, right? Because that is what it's all about. You get because I personally believe you get inspiration by looking at the people you work with, you engage with, right? Just like we say, iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. And that's what it's all about. How do I drive that human connection to you so you can improve and be inspired, right? And the space is just a conduit to make that connection.
Yeah, I think that's really really cool, and I think that's differentiating from what we see in other high tech
Hmm.
companies and kind of what their principles were around this. And
Hmm.
I really like the fact around the emphasis around pedestrian walkways, whether it's a campus or it's a actual city. There have been
Hmm.
studies done. Paris comes to mind more readily and immediately around essentially eliminating roads to
Hmm.
increase the user friendliness, but also
Hmm.
uh, the efficiency of the city itself. And
Hmm.
so, what it sounds like is what we're doing on campus is we're actively removing a lot of these roadways and replacing it with pedestrian style walkways.
Hmm. And the I'll send you the links, and we have the entire campus modernization site up. You would see our plans, you'd see our layout, you'd see what we're thinking of, right? And you'll see all the artistic renderings of what we are thinking for our campus, right? And hopefully that should inspire a lot of people, right, to think about how important experiences and engagement is for us. We spent a lot of hard work. The teams have done phenomenal work. Our colleagues from RDNS have just spent days and nights building a place that would be Microsoft.
Yeah, and obviously we're in the thick of it now. Um, But what was the driver behind doing the refresh? Was it just that the carpet was smelling kind of old and moldy, or was there some key drivers behind doing
Mhm.
this?
So I think there are a lot of drivers. I know probably the carpet smelling could be one of them. But I'll tell you
I
what
don't know. You
what
go
I
in
know.
like those older buildings, man. It's getting a little funky in there. Well, it used to be.
Right. So I'll tell you the way that I would look at it, and because this project actually started much before I came on board. Right. These projects don't happen overnight. Um, when I was brought in, the biggest challenge for us was how do we drive engagement of people in spaces so that we become attractive for future generation of Microsoft employees while not forgetting the present generation. We we love the people that work here, right, and we want them to be here, enjoy, and be better versions of themselves, empower them with the tools that are needed. But how do we brand ourselves as a place for the future? And when I say the future, we're talking about a young college grad, just graduating, coming out of college and saying, hey, where should I go and work? Sorry, should I go and work in wet Seattle, or should I work in some place which has beautiful sunshine all year round? And if I do decide to go down to Seattle, what am I going to get that I won't get in this place, which has got sunshine all around the year? what am I going to learn? What are the experiences I'm going to have? How am I going to get better at what I do? Right. So you see, the if someone comes and says, I'm moving, I mean, if we have to look purely based on weather, Mike, why would you come? What is the motivation compared to having better weather somewhere else? So we then said, right, and if you're looking at a younger person, what are they looking for, right? They're looking for community, they're looking for engagement, they're looking for experiences. How do I bring all that here so we don't miss out on the future generation of Microsoft employees while meeting the demands of the existing people, because those are the people who built Microsoft, right?
Yep.
Right? If it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be a Microsoft. So balancing that and driving those priorities to make it an absolutely engaging workplace is what we were after.
Well, and let's
Uh,
face it. I mean, you're going to spend more waking hours if you physically work on campus,
mhm.
more waking hours there than you are going to with your spouse. So
Yes.
it's
Hmm.
really, really important that it's a good experience, even if you're not, just coming out of college and you're the younger
Yeah.
generation. But for everybody, we
Hmm.
all want to be more productive. We all want our lives
Hmm.
to be, remove that friction and pain out of our lives and have a really great experience. And
Hmm.
I think that's really insightful of you and your team, where it's a focus on how can we enrich your day to day on
Hmm.
campus.
Right. And if you see the campus, it's a community. You have houses nearby, you have schools nearby, you have kids running around, you have sports happening on the fields. So we don't want to eliminate that community vibe, because ultimately it's all about community. But how do we drive it to be more beneficial for all the people that are there so they can engage better, is what we're after, right? The goal for us is, if you come down and say, hey kids, let's go to Microsoft for lunch. And they'll say, Dad, that's a phenomenal idea. Not, Dad, really, you want to take us to your office for lunch? Really, why would you think we want to come? That's what we want. Like, yes, we're going to Dad's office for lunch. That's where we need to be. That's what we want to aspire to create.
Nice. And I'm assuming as part of this, you're going to make the cafeteria hopping a much more rich and enjoyable experience.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The one of our core experience groups that we have, and we've got multiple groups: movement, productivity, access, transportation. Dining is a core experience area for us, because it's all about uh, communal eating.
Yep.
You eat with your friends, you learn with your friends, and over food, you learn and discover insights that you would have never got otherwise. So, dining experiences is a big, big part of our campus experience.
Yeah, I worked on campus for about a decade, and I went to one of my
Hmm.
old buildings, Building 18.
Uh huh.
And one, that building looks completely different, but two, I am jealous of the cafeteria they now have,
Hmm.
because the one that was there when I was in Building 18
Hmm.
was nowhere near as cool as that was. So, but you're absolutely right. I mean, whenever I would will visit Seattle with my family, one of the first things that my 11-year-old twins will ask is, "Hey, Dad, we want to go on campus and
Hmm.
show us around, eat somewhere cool, etc." So
Hmm.
even now, it's a good experience. So anything that
Hmm.
you guys do on top of that is just going to make it even better.
Oh yeah, the and it's the experience, right? If you want to have, for example, for me, my favorite cafeteria has always been Building 83, because I love the chicken burgers there.
Yeah.
Okay, I love the fresh seafood that they serve there, right? So it's an experience going from, okay, and I work in Building 21, so going from 21 to Building 83 to get that taste of chicken and seafood is what the experience for me,
Right.
right? And I wouldn't get it anywhere else. Right, and the same thing for the others as well. How do we create those unique experiences? So it's like a mini tour, right? I am breaking away from work, zoning out, minimizing my cognitive load, focusing on, yes, this is really good food. I can bond with good company. I can have open, honest discussions. And after I am completely recharged, I come back to work, better than ever.
Yes. And I agree. I mean, I think that just as people, that is, we bond around food. We always
Yes.
have, and that will
Hmm.
never change. Um, So, with regards to this project, and obviously, I mean, there's a lot that's still in development, but um, were there any surprises that you encountered or discovered along the way that you were like, oh, wow, I had no idea about this or that, that just completely caught you off
Hmm.
guard?
Hmm. There, so there were, right, and I think with any large project there are always surprises. One of the biggest surprises that we had is the importance of cross group collaboration. How do we collaborate with folks who are not technologists, right? You're talking about construction folks, general contractors, MEPs. How do we get them to understand what we are doing? And at the same time, how do we understand what they are saying? They have constraints from an infrastructure standpoint that they have to abide with, and we have constraints from an integration and connectivity standpoint that we have to abide with. So, getting these people to understand each other, to speak the same language, driving that collaboration was something that we took for granted, right? We just assumed everybody would understand everybody magically, but no. I think through that project, we have grown a deep sense of admiration for our GCs, our architects, our designers, where it is now, we can now see that, you know what, this is not just about a single project. We are transforming an industry with multiple stakeholders coming in. The second part of it, the importance, as technologists, like you said, Mike, right, and my house is similar, is I can fit out anything I want on my walls because they're my walls, right? I've got sensors hanging in, I've got lights hanging in, right? And my wife would always say, hey, you have a small little corner there. Have you thought about something? I'm like, oh yeah, that's coming. The We can't do that aesthetically for an office building, right? I just can't randomly go and keep hitting holes on the wall and say, okay, guys, let's run a Cat 6A cable from here to here and see what happens. Okay, understanding the importance of aesthetics in a space and merging that with how data is collected was eye-opening for us because we're all about data. We just don't understand how pleasing the environment has to be to the eye and why data is important, right? So finding that balance of aesthetics and design and data capture and infrastructure and being more planned. I mean, as IT, we're all agile, right? We just do it sprints all the time. But when you're working with physical infrastructure, okay, I can't break a wall every 10 days and rebuild it.
Right.
I can't, okay, after the designs have been done, I can't go and say, hey, you know what, I don't like the color of the paint, let's repaint it. Then all of a sudden my sensors won't work because they have paint all over them. So appreciating the infrastructure impacts working with these amazing group of people was something that we could not have forecasted. It was challenging, but I think we're working together to make massive improvements.
You make another great point, and I say this often, is that human beings are
Mhm.
analog, living or trying to live in a digital
Right.
world.
Yeah.
And when I go on campus,
Hmm.
some of the best experiences on campus are the analog experiences. It's the dining experience. It's the tree
Hmm.
houses. It's going to building 121 and hanging out in this old school like library that you could imagine old guys with brandy and cigars sitting in, or
Hmm.
some of the jam out session rooms with guitars and drums and
Hmm.
all that. Those are some of the best environments. While all the other stuff is very very cool and interesting, etc. But oftentimes, it's the simple things I think that we can't lose sight of. And even if
Hmm.
we wanted to add digital components to this stuff, I think that's okay. But I
Hmm.
think you're absolutely right. It's marrying the best of both worlds
Yeah.
in a meaningful way. When I say meaningful, I mean not losing that analog component that people want to have that tactile feel of, as an example, paper. Um, we already know from studies that uh, handwritten note taking, you
Hmm.
retain more knowledge by doing that than typing it into OneNote, as an example.
Yep.
So
Hmm.
just I think that's very insightful. Now, as far as with the campus, is there, if you could only pick one thing, is there one thing that you're looking forward to most coming out of this campus refresh?
Hmm. The For
I know it's
me,
a hard question, and I'm putting you on the spot, but
it is, because there are, because our whole thing was like, have you ever gone to the? I mean, if you eat Asian food, it's just that it's not one dish,
Mhm.
it's everything, right? It's just an amazing spread. And that's how the campus is for me. It's like, oh man, look at this. This is so much of great stuff. Why don't we just take all of it? But if you ask me to pick one, yeah. So I think for me, the best part of it is going to be the the ease of access and convenience of getting things done in the new campus,
Yeah.
which other times would have been just confusing, wastage of time, running around in circles, not knowing what to do, how to figure it out. But the new way is having that intelligence that allows me to seamlessly get things done easily, uh, conveniently, without even having to worry about the most mundane things of life, okay, is what the campus is going to do for me. And if I can do that, if those pain points can vanish, the campus is a massive success to me as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, and one that I definitely prescribe to. I mean, I've clocked probably just like you a lot of airline miles, and
Hmm.
I'm part of lots of the top tier alliance whatevers,
Uh,
and I'm always asked, they're like, well, okay, so your diamond status or your Delta 360 invite
hmm
only, blah de blah, what do you like most about it? And it's like, well, yeah, it's great they send me gifts and it's great that, this and that. But as a traveler, I just want it friction free. I just want to get to my
hmm
destination with the least amount of hassle possible. And I think the same way is true and
Yeah.
how a lot of people think about work. It's There's just so much friction to get from point A to point B. Uh, and there's a lot of those hops and transitions that we have to do. And so if we can make it all that much easier and on our employees, then we're going to get more out of
hmm
them. They're going to stay longer. They're going to be happier. They're going to go
hmm
home happy. Just all is going to be much, much better.
The I think the beauty of it has always been how do we the like you always know, and you probably know this extremely well. Free food and gifts can only take you so far, right? After that, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. Hold on, did I lose the video?
Yeah, it popped off there for a second.
Ah,
There you go.
the the free food and gifts, it only takes you so far, right? After a certain point of time, it doesn't matter. It is the seamless experience of you checking in, getting to your seat, just doing what you do, being undisturbed, or when you want, please disturb me. I'm free now. I'd love to have a chat.
Right.
Uh, Giving that convenience for the campus is what we're trying to do.
So transitioning a little bit. So we've talked about smart buildings as a whole, the concept, what it
Hmm.
is, what it isn't. We've talked about this major project you're working on here at Microsoft with
Hmm.
the campus refresh project. Um, Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about and get your perspective on outside of Microsoft and the campus,
Hmm.
but as an innovator in the smart building world. Um, Obviously we're all living in this global pandemic. We keep
Right.
referencing that, this is a new normal or the next normal, whatever we want to call it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, in that, there has been impacts to us going back to offices. So with
Right.
this whole COVID-19 scenario and potential next wave coming, how has this impacted the smart building world all up? Not from a Microsoft campus perspective, but just generally speaking, when you look
Hmm.
out into the market, how has this affected other smart building initiatives?
So the great points, and I think industry wise, if I put an industry lens onto it, eh, the key things that we try to drive for inside buildings have always been healthy environments. Healthy environments directly correspond to absenteeism rates. People get sick, they don't come to work. People think the building is unhealthy, they won't turn up. And with the coming in of COVID, it's really sent shockwaves down the industry to say, hold on, why do I need to go into a building where I'm surrounded by so many people where I may be at a higher risk to fall sick? And for guys like us, Mike, when we travel, our immunities goes down because that's what happens with excessive travel, pressurization. Now, and that's not the case for a large segment of the population. They like to be healthy, they like to be fit. That's what they go into buildings for. So what has happened is one, how what are building owners going to do to ensure and create their trust to say that, hey, I've got the latest UV technology for cleansing. I've got the latest air filtration technology for killing the viruses, right? So the air that you breathe is going to be much more healthier and safer, even though you're working in a large open environment or in a neighborhood. Two is how are you going to ensure that the building has more non-contact surfaces, right? If I walk in, okay, am I touching elevators, or would the elevators have destination control with facial recognition? um, or would the turnstiles have completely no touch? I don't even have to use my badge to create any type of friction. So these are the design challenge that will set in addition to that, there is a big impact on space as well because of social distancing guidelines, which will continue, uh, at least for some more time. So that basically translates to more space for lesser number of people because I need to have more distance amongst human beings. So there is going to be a massive reduction of available workspace because the 6 feet guideline starts to kick in. So these are the challenges that people will now have to encounter. So changing our design guidelines in terms of how space is going to be designed, changing our facilities practices in terms of how we are going to clean it by using UV technology or something else, how we're going to use air filtration technology that is going to intentionally knock out the viruses from the air system. Okay, are considerations that is already affecting the industry today. And as you know, space, okay, effectiveness of space is extremely important in real estate. Now, if I have to give more space for lesser number of people, there is going to be a trade-off, and that's where the cost trade-off starts to fit in.
Right.
But I do see evolving it with the latest enhanced technologies coming in for air filtration, for contact cleansing, for destination control with lifts. All that will help alleviate the problem, but it is definitely going to change the way services are provided, and that's something we're all looking forward to. And I have this a standing joke. Coming from Singapore, you have automated doors all the time. And when I came here to Redmond, I'm like, do I push this? Do I pull this? And when you talk about minimal contact, here you are, with your body against the door, trying to get that thing open. Like,
Right.
I don't think this is how it should be. Can we just have contact-free doors for the next round of design? So those are elements that I think will definitely change. And the goal is making the environment trustable so people can come and work comfortably. Otherwise, if okay, especially with kids, do I want to come and work in an office space where I don't feel safe because when I go back to my family, am I endangering them with something? So bringing trust into the equation of space, which we took for granted before, now has to be earned again, and
Yeah.
making sure that they feel comfortable.
Yeah, and you went a step further than my very simple request, which is a huge pet peeve of mine in buildings,
Hmm.
is when you go to a door and it's got one of the pull handles on it.
Uh-huh.
I just want us all to be on the same page that a pull
Hmm.
should be used when you open the door, not if
Right.
you need to push the door open.
Right.
Let's just all standardize on that.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that touchless is it's already permeating
Hmm.
other sectors like food service as an example. So you've got McDonald's that essentially they've got now these kiosks where there's facial recognition built in, so it knows who you are. It's pulled up your
Hmm.
last order. You can talk to it. You can optionally touch it, but again, it's about less contact. So preferably don't touch it,
Hmm.
or just
Right.
touch your mobile device. But that those practices are already being baked into these other industries,
Hmm.
and so I could most certainly see that being built into what we're doing. Um, Now, with some of the smart building stuff, I can also see with all the social distancing and
Hmm.
more space for less people that you described, I would imagine there's huge opportunities for AI technology to come in and do intelligent routing of people, intelligent
Hmm.
scheduling of people when they can come in the office,
Hmm.
intelligent matchmaking. Like, oh, let's have these mix of people in the building together, um,
Hmm.
based on what they're doing at this
Hmm.
particular time. And it's dynamic, so it'll change over time. So maybe it'll be a next type of group the following week because we're further along the project and we need
Hmm.
decision makers or whatever it may be. But I could definitely see, at least thinking logically about this, is that
Hmm.
organizations should be double downing on this technology, especially now, to
Hmm.
better maximize their environments and their spaces, along with buying the filtration systems, UV. Hospitality's leading the way there, where they're hiring chief cleanliness officers
Yep.
that are doing amazing things
Hmm.
to make sure that people feel safe.
Hmm.
But yeah, I would think that smart building technology should be taking off right now as a result of all the complexities with the global pandemic.
Oh, it is. I mean, it definitely is, right? Because you there is so much of chatter, and a lot of companies have already done this. Is contact tracing,
Yeah.
depending upon where you went, who you visited in that space. Do I know what occurred there? Right, that's already happening. The second thing is when we're looking at, okay, at spaces, the point that you raise with respect to scheduling workspaces, right, and putting them on a schedule so you can have. We already capture the data today. We can track utilization of buildings with heat maps,
Yep.
right? And using that heat maps to be able to predict what are the optimum points of high density within that building, and how should we mitigate that? Should we have more water coolers in distributed locations so people all don't go to the cafeteria at the same time? Should we have different schedules in terms of what the workplace cleaning schedules are so you can alternate between zones? So we have the data today. It's just that we never, right, I think the industry has woken up to find new use cases for the data we've already been collecting, right? And that's why
Emmanuel,
the uptake will be huge.
what I think you should do is I think you should look at some of the innovations coming out of hospitality
Hmm.
and have these room service robots actually go and deliver. So what we can do is,
Hmm.
so we've all got these wearables. So it's going to detect that we're a little low on our
Uh
water intake. And so it's just going to proactively have, the robot come along my desk,
huh.
dispense my water, and there it is. I don't have to go anywhere. It comes to me. We're all good.
The So, Mike, the reason, okay, I'm laughing is there was even a pre-COVID discussion that we were trying to figure out to say that, can I get robots that go around each one's cubicles and offer them a drink, because that gets that personalized service that you have. Now that COVID has come in, it's like saying, you know what, that's a brilliant idea. We should probably do that.
Hey, I'm just saying. I mean, I was in a hotel in Japan, in
uh,
Nagasaki, and it's fully autonomous. There's only
hmm.
one person that works there,
Right.
and you know what? Uh, yes, they're in the hospitality industry, but I
Uh
was
huh.
perfectly fine not dealing with people after flying 17 hours to get to Tokyo. I was
Right.
just like, look, just deliver my luggage, deliver my room service. I don't want to talk to anybody.
Right.
Um, eh, I'm also seeing in talking to like in industrial types of environments, work environments where there's temperature scanning happening
Mhm.
as well. Do you think that that's going to be more of a long term thing? Do you think that that's going to be more kind of ingrained in the workplace? What are your
Mhm.
thoughts?
So it's actually, that's a great point, and I tell people this is actually very cultural. If you look at Singapore, Singapore actually had the SARS pandemic a
Yep.
few years ago. So in Singapore, scanning for temperatures and letting you go in, again, either community places as all that was common. They should do it. People don't have a problem with it. But the moment you come to the US, right, where temperature scanning to give you access to stuff is not common. Okay, it has to do. And the question is, why do you want to take my temperature? Okay, I don't want to share it. And let's say even if they do share it, for an organization to capture temperature data for an individual, okay, is also have to do with how we own, process, and manage data, because HIPAA data standards start to kick in.
Welcome to the HIPAA
So,
world.
right, and that's where we start understanding to say, okay, hold on. Culturally accepted in other parts of the world because they've already been through a pandemic, and the people are more open to sharing it because that's how they can have the community flourish as a whole. Versus now, but I don't think the US ever had SARS
Yep.
like Singapore
No.
did.
Yeah.
So it's going through that cycle to say, oh, should I share my temperature? Is that common? The other thing is density of people.
Yeah.
You don't have that density of people that you would have in all of the US, like you would have in all of Singapore, right? It's high density. Here in the US, depending upon where you are, you may have higher density, like in New York compared to Redmond. So it's coming to a point to say, how do we enforce this? Should we enforce it? Is it needed? Or should we put the trust on the individual to say, you know what, we trust that you are healthy and you certify that you don't have a problem. But then it comes down to the fact that, are you aware that you are actually not healthy? Right. So these are the challenges we're going through. And this, I think, is something we're struggling with
Yeah.
as an industry as a whole. And I'm guessing that's going to be the biggest challenge. How do we get that trust decision out there to enforce people to publish it, or to request people are honest and they disclose it themselves? Right? And that's going to take. Uh, so it's not got to do with technology. Technology we can do right now, right? We can have thermal scanners everywhere, and you know scan an audience and to find out who's a red zone, who's a green zone. Um, but it's about acceptance by society and by culture to say, yep, this is the right thing, and I think we should be doing it for our betterment. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I think the analogy that you brought up, comparing Western and Eastern cultures, I think
Hmm.
is an important distinction, because Western cultures tend to be much more individualistic in their
Right.
views as a whole,
Hmm.
versus Eastern, which is looks at a broader societal type of impact. And so that's why if you go to somewhere like Singapore, Japan, what have
Hmm.
you, you see people wearing masks on their own because they're
Right.
sick and they don't want to give it to people.
Hmm.
Versus in Western cultures, it's my right to be sick, and
Hmm.
I don't want to wear a mask.
Right.
Or they wear a mask because they want to prevent. They're conscious about germs and they don't want to be sick. So
Hmm.
it's culturally, I think there's that big difference, but also I think as
Hmm.
well, it's they've been through some major pandemics themselves
Yeah.
with MERS and SARS and all
Right.
the other things that have passed through there. Um, so I think the challenge, though, in this kind of global connected society is, how do we balance the privacy piece with the benefits that we get from exposing this data? And, some listening might be like, well, I don't know if I feel comfortable being matchmaked at the office and having this accidental collision thing
Yeah.
happening. This seems very big brother.
Hmm.
In your mind, how do we balance this? Is this something that it's, hey, look, you're an employee of the company, you got to sign this thing, and that's just the way it is? More kind of more heavy handed, or do you
Hmm.
think that there's some other balance that needs to be put in place?
And I think this is one discussion that I have with all building owners. Say, how do we find that balance? Right. The goal is we can enforce it, but enforcement, okay, actually leads to a poor experience, lower morale, and people just quit and walk out.
Yep.
Uh, we don't have to enforce it, but then the risk is actual service adoption. People may not even feel the need to use it. For example, there was one building which was the world's smartest building back in, I think, what, 2013 or something, and it was all about, yeah, hey, okay, as soon as the thing was new, everybody started using the services, but then after a few minutes, hold on, they're actually tracking what again, and I'm giving up what, and they started turning off the services, right? And then, okay, the adoption fell flat. Our challenge has been, okay, identifying core experiences that people will benefit from if they willingly are able to share certain aspects of data, right? So the key is, and the challenge for us is not about the lack of technology, it's about digitizing the right experiences to ensure people are willing to give up something, because the benefit of doing that is much more than not doing so, right? And that's why these projects are, yes, they're technology projects, but a lot of it has to do with identifying the right experiences to drive that engagement.
Now, a common thing that's kind of I've been
Hmm.
thinking about over time
Uh-huh.
with some of these bits, because I've less thought about it in a smart building context, but thought about it more in smart cities context.
Uh-huh.
So
Hmm.
bubbled up a little bit. Um, what happens when you've got a workforce, a very diverse workforce of different ideologies, political views,
Hmm.
etc.? Let's say you've got
Hmm.
a very small portion, 5% of your employees are libertarians, and they're like, look, you're not touching my data. You don't have
Hmm.
access to any of it. Um, others are somewhere in the middle, and then others are like, give it all away. I don't care.
Hmm.
Um, how do you deal in an environment where you do have that choice? And
Hmm.
obviously, those algorithms that you're using to match make and, temperature controls and all that, there's a prerequisite that you have the information to suggest
Hmm.
all these great services. So what
Hmm.
happens in kind of this diverse pool of people where some just don't want to participate in that, which
Hmm.
you may have very hard dependencies. Let's say you know our boss doesn't want to share any of their data, but all the great AI services that we're going to receive is dependent on our boss's data. How does that work?
Hmm. No, that's a great point, and I think this is something that we are actually struggling with because the quality of the AI algorithms is directly proportional to the amount of data that you have.
Right.
And in a world where we're now struggling to say that, can I expose it? Should I expose it? And do I want to expose it? Is where the struggle is coming in. Now, the other key aspect for smart buildings for us has always been about accessibility and inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
Two non negotiable pillars, they have to be there. I have to be inclusive of everyone that comes into contact with my buildings, irrespective of what their views are. That's how it has to be. So that's where we then go into angles of saying that, yes, I have the service available, but if I don't want automatic matchmaking, I should have the flexibility to be able to walk around in corridors and spaces just like how I be used to searching for that person and picking that person out. So driving that type of engagement and providing the options available to them is something that we're driving as well. And I'm hoping that this makes it more inclusive, where when people start seeing the benefits of sharing that data, they then say, hey, you know what, maybe it's not that bad of an idea, I should probably give this up so I can get a better parking spot closer to the building without having to spin for 20 minutes a day.
Right.
Right, so those benefits can only be realized when they see it in action. So for me, it's about proving the benefits and getting people to open up to say, oh, you know what, this actually does work. Why don't I try it out? Because if you don't, I mean, it's try before you buy,
Right.
right? That's what it is.
And
So if
sometimes
I
you
can,
just have to feel the pain to go,
yeah,
oh, okay, yeah, I have been kind of overworking in this area. Maybe I should share a little bit of this data,
right.
compromise a bit to get
Mhm.
some great benefit out of it.
And that's why the direction to the teams has been, it's not about how much, it's about how little do they need to give up to consume that service. Because the moment I tell them, hey, sign a waiver and your life now belongs to me, they're like, no, no, no way. But if I say, I just need to be able to track the license plate of your car and I use this for navigating you to a parking lot. So in the 6,000 odd cars that are parked there, in case you forget, you don't have to walk around clicking. But if you do want to walk around clicking, by all means, go ahead and say, you know what? Yeah, take my license plate. Just tell me where my car is, man. I want to go home.
Right. So as we start to wind down here, I think it's important to ask you because you've got a ton of experience in this space. You're working with many different
Hmm.
customers on this. You've got this huge project at Microsoft. I guess if there was, you know, keeping with the rule of three here, if there was a top three lessons that you've learned through your collective smart building experience that you think would be really beneficial for folks getting started in this, or maybe even are already in the depths of this, what
Hmm.
advice would you give them? Top
So for
three.
me, so top three is focus on the experiences you want to have for that building. Two, okay, understand the infrastructure that needs to be provisioned so your building can be built smart from the ground up. The last thing you want to do is build that building and start drilling holes in the walls and laying new conduits. It just won't work, right? And the final point is about, okay, identify the minimal required data you would need people to give up
Yep.
and the data that you need from the various systems that you have within your building so they can start to communicate. The moment you say you want everything, people just switch off completely.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I think that's phenomenal. At the end of the day, it's focus on the UX. What do you want people to get out of this? Because at the end of the day,
Hmm.
it's for them. Um,
Right.
Now, so we talked about kind of best practices. Now, if there was one thing that if you could get into a DeLorean and go back in time.
Uh-huh.
Um, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
Um, right. So if I could do that, I probably would have taken, okay, I probably would have sat to do the initial building design with the architects and the GCs, right, rather than having them come out with the design, right, and then saying, let us meet in the middle. Working with those designers and the general contractors up front and planning for it would have been something that I probably would have done.
Nice. And I'm sure people are listening. They're like, look, this is a super smart guy. He's doing some really cool stuff, and maybe they want to get a hold of you. Is there a way for folks to get a hold of you, or are you open to that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm absolutely, I'm on LinkedIn, Emmanuel Daniel. Feel free to reach out to me there. Let me know how I can help. And once again, if I can't, Microsoft has got plenty of brilliant people. I'm sure someone else can definitely help you.
Awesome. Well, listen, Emmanuel, there was lots of other things that I wanted to talk to you about as well, but I want to be very conscious of your time. But
Hmm.
hopefully, you'll come back and we'll talk about some of that stuff on another episode. So,
Yeah,
thank you for joining us.
absolutely, Mike. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure talking with you.
All right, guys. Bye now.
All right, thank